The left hemisphere is more interested in quantity, the right hemisphere in quality. And perhaps the most important difference is that the left hemisphere sees only representations. Now, what is a representation? A representation, as the word suggests, is a presence after the fact, when it's no longer actually present, represented. But there is such a thing as something presencing to us. In German, Heidegger uses the term anwesen, to presence. And he actually had to invent the verb from the noun anwesen. But in English, we have adopted this idea of presencing, which is that something comes into being between you and the world. Now, this is not just a figure of speech in my belief. I believe that anything exists only in a relationship, and that relationship is between the perceiving consciousness and the other consciousness that is generating this, whatever it is that we do perceive. I'm not saying we make it all up. That's a kind of ghastly postmodernism that I reject. It's negative and nihilistic. Of course there's a reality. But it's not just out there in some naive, realistic way, like it's something that we receive like on a photographic plate or on a recorder or something. We take part in its becoming what it is. I've suggested already attention, and the nature of attention makes a difference. So, what are these two worlds phenomenologically like? You could say that of the left hemisphere is one in which what we take for reality is in fact a representation, something like a map, a theory, a diagram. All these things are fine, but they're very thin compared with the complexity of reality. And their value lies in that. A map is useful in as much as it leaves almost everything in the world out. If it had more information in it, we couldn't use it. It's one that's made of isolated things. I believe, actually, that there are no things. I haven't got time to go into this, but that the fundamental nature of existence is in relations, and that relations are prior to what we call relata, the things that we perceive. And these things, moreover, are known, familiar, predetermined, fixed, made up of bits, fragments that are decontextualized, disembodied, and have no meaning or coherence until we give it to them. Where all is abstract, generic in nature, infinitely reproducible, quantifiable, and inanimate, and the future is a fantasy in which things can only get better for being under our control. Because the raison d'etre of the left hemisphere is to apprehend, grasp, adprehendery, grasp onto stuff. It doesn't comprehend, which is to begreifen, to hold together. It angreift rather than begreift. And so we've got this distinction in the way the two hemispheres work. On the other hand, in the world of the right hemisphere, nothing is finally certain or entirely predictable, but replete with possibility and order, one in which all is not isolated, but ultimately connected to everything else, is not fixed, but flowing, where what exists are wholes, and the parts are, if you like, an artifact of the left hemisphere's tendency to split everything up. Most of the meaning not only is, but has to remain implicit in this world if it's not to be traduced, if it's not to be totally misrepresented. Where it's a world where no two anythings are ever the same, but unequal and asymmetric, being always, like each blade of grass, unique, where quality matters at least as much as, if not more than, quantity, a world that is essentially animate and whose projected future is a product of realism, not denial. A little comment on denial. The left hemisphere is grossly optimistic. It thinks it understands everything. It thinks it's in control. As you know, the intelligent person knows how much they don't know and therefore is aware of this, but a really stupid person thinks they know everything because they don't know what it is they don't know. This is called the Dunning-Kruger effect. It can be seen all around you. The left hemisphere doesn't know very much, but because of that, it thinks, we've got it, we know everything. Just one more experiment, we'll have it all sorted out and under our control. This is not reality. Let me give you an example from neurology. A person comes in the night with a left hemisphere stroke. They have a right paralyzed arm, and they're all too aware of it, and they're rather sad. And they say, well, what can I do with this? They come in with a right hemisphere stroke and a paralyzed left arm. You go to see them in the morning and say, how are you? Very well, thank you. Oh, well, that's good. Any problems anywhere, like moving anything? No, no, no. Moving your left arm, for example? No, 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 fine. Well, could you move it then? There. And nothing actually moves. And if you bring it round in front of them and say, there, move that, they say, oh, that's not my arm. That belongs to that man over there. Or you, doctor. But they don't. It is deep in denial. In fact, V.S. Ramachandran, you probably know the name, he's a very distinguished neuroscientist, says that without this guiding, reality-centered right hemisphere, the left hemisphere is prone to delusions. And I have examined it at enormous length, and it's in the part 1 of The Matter with Things, my latest book. The delusions and misperceptions that occur following and connected to brain injury, and practically all of the really amazing delusions and hallucinations occur after damage to the right hemisphere rather than the left. And indeed in schizophrenia, which is a condition, of course, very familiar to all of you, in which often are prominent delusions and hallucinations, they appear to show all the signs of right hemisphere hypofunction and the left hemisphere having gone into overdrive to account for things. You know, in English, we used to say that mad people had lost their reason. But it's been pointed out, first of all, by Eugene Mankowski, the Franco-Polish psychiatrist, a brilliant man and a brilliant philosopher, but then by the English writer G.K. Chesterton, that what happens in madness is that the person loses everything but their reason. So they've got only their reason to try and work everything out. No common sense, no view of what is probable or possible here. So the two important things I want you to take away is that one world is like a map, a representation, the other like the complex and beautiful world. One is inanimate and the other animate, broadly speaking. I haven't got time to go into all the detail. There's 2,000 pages for you to examine if you really want to know all the detail. And in my latest book, I refer to 5,600 papers from the literature. There is a kind of, what's it called, urban myth, that the thing about hemisphere difference is all exploded. If you talk to somebody ignorant, they'll say, oh, no, that's all rubbish. I mean, that was all exploded years ago. But actually, in the meantime, scientists have been doing what scientists should do, which is not be carried away by a dogma, but actually look. And what they found is masses of evidence of the difference between these two hemispheres. I'm the lucky person who was able to make sense of the picture. Now, most of this is laid out in a book called The Master and His Emissary, which came out in 2009, published by Yale University Press, and it sold over 200,000 copies. But I have written a much more interesting, I believe, book that takes it further and looks at the whole constitution of the cosmos. So first of all, I'm looking at neuropsychology, how we appreciate anything. Then the second part of the book is epistemology. How do we say we ever get to know something? And I suggest that in the first part of the book, I show that in all the important ways of getting hold of a reality, the left hemisphere is inferior, demonstrably inferior, less veridical than the right. In the second part of the book, I show that it's not good enough to use just science or just imagination or just reason or just intuition. We actually need to use all four of these wherever possible. And interestingly, in each case, particularly clearly in maths and science, the great discoveries were made by right hemisphere function. I can say that because they come suddenly as a gestalt, with an apparent aha moment, a revelation, and this has been robustly connected with the right superior temporal sulcus and gyrus. I give many examples in the book from scientists and mathematicians. But what I also do in the second part of the book is to look through Western history at the big turning points in the history of ideas. So I start off with the Greeks and the Romans, and come forward to the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Enlightenment, for Clairvaux, Air Clairvaux, I don't know. The Industrial Revolution, Romanticism, Modernism, and Postmodernism. So there we are. And what I suggest at the end is that we live in a world in which we are not being guided by what our right hemisphere would tell us. There is actually a war on attending to the body, attending to intuition, attending to experience. These have all been devalued because apparently a machine will be better at all these things. As we move more and more, month by month, never mind year by year, into a world dominated by bureaucratic thinking and its physical counterpart, which is vastly complicated systems of AI, the world becomes less and less like a human world and less like one that really understands what a human being is, what the world is, and what we're doing here. I don't think we've the faintest idea anymore. And this is not because something terrible has happened to the right hemisphere. It's because in a culture which is publicly self-analytic, and there is a public discourse which relies on a sort of process of rationalizing, all the sources of immediate information about the world that we used to have been ruled out. Number one was the natural world, which tells you there's more here than we can really understand is going on and why. But, until 150 years ago, most people in the world lived in intimate contact with the natural world. Now it may be only half or not that. Then there is culture. We're now supposed to reject and disparage our own culture at any rate, and reject a tradition, because a tradition means fossilization. But excuse me, a tradition doesn't. A tradition is a living thing like a plant. It grows, and it can be made to grow better. But you won't improve. If you want a plant to go off a wall here, the answer is not to pull it out and stick it on the wall, because it'll die. You train it. A gardener knows this. And a tradition is a living thing. Look at the last few hundred years, how that tradition has changed every decade, practically. So it's a major problem. We've thrown away the wisdom of our ancestors. We're also, I think, in the process of throwing away, or we have been in the 20th century, we've made art too conceptual, too intellectual, and not visceral enough, so that a painting shouldn't need to be explained to you by a long screed on the wall. It's not a thought, it's a being. And you are in contact with this being as you are with your friend. And it speaks to you or it doesn't. If it's lost that power, it's lost one of the ways in which we can be told that the world is not explicitly calculable, explicitly explicable. And I think also religion has been either turned into something fundamentalist, which is the left hemisphere's idea. It's all in a book. It's all completely true. This is the truth. I have it. You're wrong. This black and white thinking, and particularly this I'm right thinking, is very typical of the left hemisphere. You can see it in patients who have right hemisphere damage. Or religion has been presented as a kind of childish fantasy. Anybody, somebody very simple, not very well educated, would believe in it. I think that's a massive error. It just means that our minds are no longer subtle enough to understand what the foundations of this thinking were. And I have a long chapter in the latest book called The Sense of the Sacred, in which I try to convey why this thing is hardly turnable into words, but nonetheless for that, in fact, because of that, it is inexpressible. It is of central importance.